I'm Christina from Bedford Public Library, and today we're going to learn about the science of bread, and we're going to make some too. Okay, today we're actually going to make two types of bread. In the blue bowl, I'll be making an unleavened bread, which just means there's no rising agent, there's no yeast or baking soda. And in the clear bowl, we'll be using yeast. And that way we can see a clear difference between what the yeast allows bread to do. So first we have 2 cups of flour already in the bowls. We're going to add a teaspoon of salt to each one. That just allows nice flavor to come through. We have some oil here. I'm using olive oil, but you can use a vegetable oil or whatever else you might have on hand. And we're using a tablespoon of oil. And we're using 3/4 of a cup of water. I'm actually using warm water, but that's mostly for the yeasted bread rather than the unleavened bread. Then we're going to add 2 teaspoons of sugar to just the yeasted one. The reason we do that is yeast is actually a living organism, and so it likes to eat sugar, and that'll allow it to do all the fun rising that it'll do. So we're just going to mix this up until it comes together. And once it's mostly together, we'll switch to the other one. There's the unleavened one, and here's our yeasted one. And now we're just going to add a little flour to our board. I'm going to go ahead and move things off. And you just need a little flour to dust your workspace with. And just make sure that you can knead without getting it to stick to your work surface. So we're going to start with our unleavened bread. It is still rather sticky at this point. Which is why we're kneading it. So what happens when we knead is there's a protein in flour that is called gluten, and this basically is allowing it to stretch and basically come together more. With an unleavened bread, you only need to knead it until it comes together. With the yeasted bread, you can knead a little bit longer, but you just want to make sure that it becomes nice and stretchy and not so far that it gets almost hard. I'm just adding more flour since it is such a sticky dough. The amount of flour you'll need for kneading depends on how humid it is. Today is a very humid day, so it's easy to get that flour wet as opposed to getting it all to come together. So there's our nice unleavened bread. It's going to go back into our bowl. And we're going to switch to our yeasted dough. Again, it starts out very much not together. We're just going to try to get it to come together in a ball. Now that's feeling pretty good, so we're going to get that back in its bowl. And you want to let these sit and rest. And that allows the gluten to just release a little bit, and it also allows the yeast its time to work. So we're going to wait for about an hour, and then we're going to see where they're at. So now we've let them rest, and as you can see, the yeasted dough is significantly larger than the unleavened dough. This one also has some air holes. This is because as the yeast has eaten the sugar, it's also released gas, and that's popped up through the dough. So now we're just going to take our doughs and make them into breads that we can use. So I'm just going to separate them into roughly fourths. And the first two I'm just going to shape into nice little rolls. And I'm placing these on a sheet pan that has some cornmeal on it. This helps it from sticking to the pan before it gets baked. And the reason I'm doing both rolls and a flatbread is because usually a yeasted dough you would have on in a roll or in a bigger loaf, and with the unleavened you would usually stretch it out more into a flatbread. And so this way you can compare what they do with the different shapes. So we've got that one nice. So we've got our unleavened ones ready. Now we're just going to take cornmeal and we're actually going to punch this down. That's going to release some of that air, make it a little bit easier to handle. We're going to let these rest as well before we go in the oven, so they will gain that air back. This is a little sticky. And again, that just depends on your humidity for the day. And sometimes even just the brand type of flour you have. Some things stick more than others. Okay, so now again we have our unleavened bread. The flatbreads are still very flat. The rolls have not risen at all. And here we have the yeasted, where you can see it's puffed up almost like a pizza crust on the flatbreads and almost like hamburger buns on the rolls. So we're going to get these in the oven. My oven is set at 450. The flatbreads will not take long. They'll probably be between 4 and 6 minutes. The buns will probably be more like 8 or 10, maybe even 12. We'll see how they bake. So here's our final bread. Here and here is the unleavened, and here has the yeast. So to look closer at the flatbreads, this is very tightly centered. There's not a lot of color or interest in it. There's this one has little holes in it, again from the yeast. It's nice and thick, got a little bit browner. And again, same we have here of very tight structure, very dense, and not a lot of color. And back here, we've got a nice brown with a nice open structure. If you try this, let us know. And that is how baking bread works. Thanks. Goodbye.